willing volunteers from the industry or from academia who want to help us do more, then we'll consider all approaches. But for the time being, this is the second of 6. The series was put together initially in response to approaches that I was getting from students, particularly final year and master's students, many of whom suddenly find themselves in the unfortunate position of having to prepare for exams or submit dissertations, possibly getting ready to go on internships. And now the world has suddenly changed. So we set it up in that way to try and help you. And Ricardo and Benjamin very kindly agreed to participate. But I think this series now has evolved into something much more. And as I'm watching the ticker, we've now got 349 people participating in this. So, thanks to everybody who's here, and thanks to everybody who's been involved in putting this together. The focus of today's session is really about the practice of sponsorship. And rather than have people like me standing up in classrooms and talking about what sponsorship is, we've got 2 people who work at the cutting edge of the industry, who are involved with very high profile organizations, very high profile sponsors and high profile events. And so hopefully what they will do is to talk about 2 things, I guess. The first one is the practice of sponsorship. In terms of when you set up a deal and you manage it and you evaluate its effectiveness, what does that involve? At the same time, what we're also going to try and do is to get their insights into what it takes to become a sponsorship professional, and particularly a leading sponsorship professional as these 2 guys are. That obviously needs to be set in the context of what we currently face in terms of COVID-19. And so hopefully what they will also do is just to tell us a little bit about how they see the sector, how they see the sponsorship industry at this moment. We're going to try and go for about 90 minutes, although if we get bored, it may be shorter. If we get excited, it may go on for longer, but it'll have to continue via social media. There might be some time for Q&A later, but we've already had quite a lot of questions being emailed through. And so we may not be able to respond to questions that people are asking. So if we don't get around to your question, I apologize. For those people who do want to talk about the contents of the session or want to ask further questions, you can go to Twitter, use the hashtag SportAssist, and post there, and we'll try and look at those later. And if there is a possibility of answering further or giving more information, we'll do so there. So that's my monologue. For those of you who know me, for those of you who've been in my classes before, you'll know that that's a really short monologue on my part, and I'm not going to say very much from now on. I'm going to leave it to the 2 stars of the show. And so thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Benjamin. Can I begin by asking you for very personal views about how do you currently see what's happening in the industry, in sponsorship, and how do we deal with this, do you think? Ricardo.
Well, thank you, Simon, for the invitation. I hope everyone is having a good day and everybody's safe at home, as everybody else. I'm broadcasting from Atlanta in the United States. So, and I think that the way that the industry is behaving is the same way that everybody else and every other part of life is behaving. A lot of uncertainty. We are trying to keep things moving to the best of our abilities, but there's so much uncertainty that it really requires us to stop in a lot of different areas and wait for developments in the broader world before we make any decisions that are specific to our activities, our work responsibilities. It's for any multinational these days, most of the people are accustomed to work remotely. So that doesn't impact a lot the way we perform. Of course, it's great to be together with people and it makes things easier and faster. But we've been able to keep the ball rolling in pretty much every project that we have, and things are moving relatively well. We have a great team here in Atlanta and in a lot of different places dedicated to sponsorship. So that's moving relatively well so far. So,
okay, thank you, Benjamin.
Hey guys, thank you very much again. Yeah, to echo Ricardo, thanks for having me on, giving me the opportunity. Thanks to everyone who's tuned in. And again, yeah, very, very similar to what Ricardo said. I think everything we talk about today is in the context of sponsorship, in the context of sports marketing. There is a bigger world out there, and there are people who will lose their lives over this this pandemic. There are people that are going to lose their businesses and being wholly affected. So again, I hope everyone out there is safe and well wherever you may be in the world. I'm currently in Amsterdam. I hope the sound's okay, because I have got the doors open because it's such a beautiful sunny day. But again, it's uncertainty, really. I think I won't repeat what Ricardo said, but I suppose if I can look maybe a few weeks down the line, a few months down the line, and as I said, very much in the context and tone of what is going on in the wider world. But I think sport and entertainment is going to have a huge role when we come out the backside of this, whenever that may be. And I suppose that makes me feel very fortunate to do what I do. I think we have appreciate what sport gives us in our lives, whether that's on a health and a fitness benefits type scale, and in most countries you're allowed out for your 1 hour of exercise, or is it all the way through to getting together with friends, whether it's at a stadium, at home around the TV with a beer, and actually watching sport. So I think the positives that will come out of this, and again I use this word positive very much in the context of what's going on, but I think sport and entertainment is going to have an awfully huge role to play in the next 18 months in bringing us out the back of this, bringing us back together, giving us things to enjoy and look forward to, and essentially get together again. And what an incredible 2021 of sport we already have to I hope look forward to in 12, 18 months.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to dwell too much on Corona, because that wasn't the initial intention of the Q&A session. So there are all kinds of questions that I personally would really like to ask. I'll do that privately afterwards when we've finished. But again, just to re-emphasize, people on Twitter, #SportAssist, if you want to talk more about what sponsorship might look like in a month's time, or in 6 months' time, or in a year's time, I think that's a really interesting discussion and debate to have. But if I could move on, and again, this next section of questioning, which was really the platform upon which we originally intended to build this Q&A, is about sponsorship and the practice of sponsorship. And it was primarily targeted at students, but I think there's a lot in here that will help academics too, and I'm sure people in the sector. So hopefully there's something for everyone within this. The first question really that I had, Benjamin, was just very simple. When you talk about a sponsorship program, and we hear lots about Heineken has a sponsorship with, or Coca-Cola has a sponsorship with, what does that mean? What is it? What does a typical sponsorship program look like? What does it mean?
I was hoping you were going to tell me. I think realistically, the answer to that is there isn't a typical sponsorship program. You'll hear people a lot talk about what's the difference between a sponsorship and a partnership. Let's call it sponsorship. Sponsorship can be at multiple levels, across multiple platforms, across multiple sports, for multiple fees and for multiple reasons, quite frankly, and come about for a multiple variety of ways. So there really isn't I don't think a definitive answer. Obviously, if you were to distill that down, when we look at the lens of sport, it's obviously a organisation coming involved with another, let's say, sporting organisation, be that a rights holder, a national governing body, a broadcaster, a team, or even an ambassador, to mutually deliver, or to deliver for that organisation, because let's remember the payment most of the time goes one way, for that organisation that is paying the other organisation to deliver based on the reasons and objectives for that sponsorship to begin with in the first place. So if we were to try and distill it down, that's how I'd describe it. But if I've definitely learned one thing, is there is no one size fits all. Sponsorships happen for a variety of different reasons, sometimes extremely targeted and extremely planned and extremely strategic. And sometimes, to be quite frank, let's not mistake that sometimes the deal signed on the golf course by the chairman still absolutely happens. I've worked on those types of sponsorships in particularly when I was in an agency. So, you know, and that's probably what's so great about the world we work in and about sponsorship. It can happen on multiple levels, in multiple sectors, with multiple partners, and every single one is different. And I've certainly found that there's definitely no cookie cutter, sort of cookie cutter strategy or process you can take from sponsorship to sponsorship or from business to business. Everyone operates very, very differently.
Before I go to Ricardo, can I just pick up on a term that you use? Could you explain it? Because
Sure.
I suspect there may be people who are new to sponsorship in the audience. There are certainly students in the audience who may be unsure what it means. You talked about a rights holder. What's a rights holder?
Sorry, yeah, apologies. I'll try and use as few acronyms as well as possible, because when we start talking marketing, everything's ATB, BTP, BTL, ATL.
Okay, so that's my next 5 questions sorted out.
Exactly. A rights holder, essentially, for me, is anybody who owns a set of rights, and a set of rights is owning assets or something. So, and those rights holders then, you know, sell. So a rights holder in my world would be UEFA, would be FIFA. Would be the IOC, would be World Rugby, would be the EPCR. That's what a rights holder is in my world and terminology.
So just quickly before I move on to Ricardo, so apologies, Ricardo. The kind of big deals you have, obviously UEFA Champions League, others.
Across my career, I've worked on the Champions League, Rugby World Cups, Olympics and Paralympic Games. You know, very similar to Ricardo. Worked on you know, more local events, golf tournaments, UK athletics events, the London Marathon, Premier League, England rugby, England football, clubs in terms of, you know, Chelsea, Liverpool, Man United, Arsenal. So yeah, number of different platforms.
Okay, thank you, Ricardo. What's a sponsorship program?
Let me try to build on what Benjamin said. So it's primarily a commercial relationship between a company with brands that need to make their brands more interesting and more appealing to their consumers. So we pay someone else that owns rights to things that people care, sports, entertainment, to have access to their content. And content can be a variety of things, as Benjamin said. It can be an individual, can be associated with a person, can be associated with an event, can be associated with, you know, production of content, if you think entertainment. So a bunch of different things. And usually the companies, you know, sign contracts to acquire specific rights that the company believes that can be used to tell stories about the brand that will make their brands more appealing to their consumers and make the business grow faster than would have grown otherwise. So it's a shortcut to become more interesting to consumers.
Okay, somebody's sent a question in, which I think probably relates to what you've just said. What view do you take, both of you, of the contribution that sponsorship can make in terms of social responsibility? You know, is this something that's important to you, or you see as being significant?
It's a fundamental part of how sponsorships are used today. That answer a couple of years ago would have been very different. The purpose of the sponsorships, they used to be very commercial, primarily commercial. Today, things like social responsibility, sustainability are at the core of sponsorships. In my conversations with some of our partners, so the International Olympic Committee, for example, or FIFA, or the Special Olympics, it is one of the first questions that we get from them, from athletes, from federations, is how we are going to address this issue, which is beyond the sponsorships, which is beyond the sport. How we are going to address things like waste management. So what you do with plastic, what you do with how you're going to create options and possibilities for people that don't have access to sports to have access to sports. How you're going to empower women in sports. So all of this, which are non necessarily sports related, are brought into the sporting world, and sponsorships play a role in providing answers to that, and creating possibilities for the companies to tell their sustainability stories, their social responsibility stories through sponsorships.
Okay. Thank you, Ricardo. Benjamin, I'm getting one or two questions coming through, because obviously Heineken is an alcohol brand. Do you have a particular view of social responsibility and what you should be doing through a sponsorship?
Yeah, I think, again, I'll try not to repeat exactly what Ricardo says and try and make different points. But I think, listen, you asked at the beginning, what's a sponsorship? And I think the sponsorship industry was it 35 billion last year? So divide that and you're going to come up with an awful lot of sponsorship deals out there in the world. So do all of them contain CSR or social responsibility, corporate social responsibility initiatives? The answer to that is no. Is sport and is sponsorship a place where you can land incredible, meaningful messaging or initiatives or start movements? Absolutely. And that goes back to what I was saying about obviously COVID-19 and I think the ability that sport has to galvanize people and a lot of people really are passionate about sport. But then also on, and I don't think it necessarily matters the size of the brand or the size of the business, but I think more and more people engage and work with brands who have a purpose. Who have some sort of purpose and sort of pitching up an event and putting your logo behind you and doing the odd bit of this or that probably doesn't cut it in many of the, I don't think scale is important. It's not just the bigger brands or the bigger sponsorships, but in this day and age, consumers have so much choice that brands with purpose, and you're seeing that through COVID-19, people either making stands, making points, you see every day, even in sport, the football clubs that are being criticised for maybe the way in which they're dealing with the crisis by committing money or putting their staff onto certain government-backed schemes. Purpose has become so important. And I think again, you look at some brands. Ricardo was saying about plastic and sustainability and how cups are reused. I try not to talk too much about Coca-Cola. I think what those guys have done around World Cups previously by taking that plastic and creating football pitches in places that didn't have, were underdeveloped and didn't have pitches before. So there's a variety of ways in which you can really use your sponsorships and platforms for good and for wider purposes and drive that purpose.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good point. I'll flip back to Ricardo. Using sponsorships. Very simple question. Why do you do it?
Well, we do it because it helps to grow our business. Whenever you associate your brand with a partner and with things that people care, sports, entertainment, so they tend to pay more attention to what you do. And when they pay more attention to what you do, they usually consume more your products. So there is a direct correlation, and we can talk about measurement later, but every time that we develop a program, a marketing campaign, an activity that involves sponsorships, the business grows faster than would have grown without it. And there is, I have worked in a couple of different companies, different global sponsors, and the behavior is the same regardless of the industry. So the ROI is very positive. The return on the investments that we make on sponsorship is very positive. That's why we do it.
Mm-hmm. Benjamin?
Yeah, again, I come back to what I said at the start. I think, sponsorship has so many reasons of why you do it. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about it. So I won't go too deep into it, but how do you measure sponsorship? You mentioned at the beginning, and I've always come with the view is that you can only measure sponsorship off of good objectives. So, that comes back to your question of why do you do it? If you have a very clear mandate or reason for why you're getting involved in a partnership or sponsorship, you're A, going to be able to track and measure it, but C, B, you're going to be able to get the results out of it. So there's a number of different ways that people do sponsorship and why they do sponsorship. I think on the top level, again, we'll talk about digital and social and the rise of esports, but again, I'm very much of the opinion that TV and broadcast is still king. Mm-hmm. Getting eyeballs onto a sporting event and therefore onto your brand is still a huge reason why people do it at top levels, for, you know, for that exposure, for that awareness, for the positioning that it then gives your brand to be associated with the type of events that you want to be associated with. And then potentially, if you've got a relevant message to tell to that audience at that moment, or whether it's just purely about the kind of awareness, brand building, and those commercial metrics that that Ricardo talked about at the beginning of why do you do sponsorship.
So I'm using all of my skills and my 25 eyes at the moment, because I'm looking all over my screen, seeing questions coming in and trying to listen at the same time. And Benjamin, you talked about esports there.
Yes.
And somebody had sent a question in about esports. So I'm wondering from both of you, where in terms of sponsorship, both in general terms, but also in terms of COVID-19, what's your view of esports and sponsorship and where we're at right now?
Who do you want to take that?
Benjamin.
Yeah, do you know what? I'm a terrible person to ask this question to.
Okay, Ricardo.
No, purely because I've never been a big gamer, to be quite frank. Sort of growing up, it was never something that really grasped me. So, I have my own views on esports. I think one thing I've noticed is I feel like there's almost a narrative that it's either esports or it's sports. And I just think the two live hand in hand. And I think esports, for me, is no different to the rise in women's sport. Clearly, there's other reasons or other things that come around women's sport and the rise of that. But what I mean by that is it's a strand. It's not something separate. If you're a sponsor of a UEFA or of a Champions League or a big football event, esports can just be another strand of that, and the way that people play FIFA and engage with FIFA and engage with clubs and players through that, it's just another tool, I think, and a communication channel to fans and maybe to a different audience or a different fan audience. But I think sometimes it gets talked about as this whole separate world that's somewhere else, and of course it has its nuances, but I think it kind of is more connected than sometimes we talk about it. And I'm really interested to see, and I think from a brand, what I probably sometimes don't see when it comes to esports is very clear roles for brands other than, say, a gamer or a live esports event with branded products in it. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested to see how that world develops, to really start seeing case studies of how brands have used e-gaming or esports to really create an activation that's almost either standalone or part of their wider campaign that really sort of resonates. So I watch that space with great interest. It's clearly something that huge amounts of people are passionate about, massive audiences, very different ways to tap into those audiences. And I think probably as well, a lot of the stigma of esports, it must be 16 and under. I think that stigma is starting to wash away as well, and that the esports market is mixed gender, and 16 to 45 and sometimes beyond.
Thank you, Ricardo. You got a view of esports?
Yeah, so I agree with Benjamin. It's another manifestation of consumer passion, and people care about gaming because the gaming itself, or because the gaming is a virtual representation of a sport that people like to. For us, we use gaming in a couple of different ways. The first one is the gaming as a consumption occasion of beverages. Watching gaming or playing gaming, and I'd say gaming and not esports, because esports is a subset of gaming, a very specific, hardcore subsector of the much bigger world, which is gaming. Casual gaming, people playing for leisure, not for competition. So we use this passion that people have for gaming as a media occasion first. So a lot of people watching, people playing, a lot of people playing, and when they play, they need refreshments, they need energy, so they drink a lot of our beverages during this occasion. So first and foremost, a media opportunity. The second one is the use of the content of gaming to give us credibility with the broader public. So when you're playing Electronic Arts EA FIFA game, you see signage, you see integration of Coke messaging in the game, and that makes our brand more relevant to that community that is interested in playing. And then the third one is working through influencers in the gaming community to increase our meaning for the people that follow these individuals. So we work with a couple of influencers, and they help tell our story and tell people that when they're playing, they should be hydrated and should drink this and that. So this is how we use. So it's a purposeful way of using it, but I think that from a behavior standpoint is not very different than the relationship that I, as a fan, I have with my favorite sport.
Thanks both for that. Can I just say that now I'm aware in front of me the number of questions that people are asking is mounting up, and I'm trying to ask some questions that you've audience that you've asked. Apologies if I don't directly ask questions that you've asked, but we'll think about later whether there's an opportunity to do that through some means. Just to move on in terms of the process of sponsorship. So when you're looking at, okay, we're making a decision about sponsorship. We want to partner. We want to sign a deal with whoever. What do you look for? When you say, okay, Champions League, we've gone with Champions League because we've gone with the Olympics, because we've gone with something else, because Benjamin, what is it that you're looking for? What kind of qualities, features, characteristics are important?
Well, I mean, I think, you've mentioned, two of the world's biggest events there, and, you look at the partners of the IOC and UEFA, and obviously they are of a stature that complements and works with the size of those events. So clearly for a business, when I was at my previous job at Samsung, where we were an IOC partner and an IPC partner as well, Heineken here with obviously UEFA, as you've mentioned, those are global brands. They pretty much are known across the globe. So you're looking for events or partnerships that again resonate across the globe. That all of your markets, from Australia to the UK to the US to Brazil can all get involved in. So you can drive value. I talked about that brand stature and brand awareness before. Clearly, you want. You only partner with things that either have the same values or the same, mutual kind of level, a mutual beneficial level that your brand has, or what you want your brand to be. So again, that on that type of level, there's we'll probably come on to talk about, what's involved in a sponsorship deal. You get tickets where you can send consumers and B2B customers and build relationships with people to those types of events. Again, those are premium events that, the UCL final is that event every year that everyone wants to go to, probably, a bit like the Super Bowl. And of course, like the Olympics every 4 years, although obviously within the Olympics, you have a number of different events. But again, we will keep talking about this in the same theme. That's not to say that sponsorship only happens at those global levels. And if you're a local community business or a smaller regional or national business, then again, being very clear on what you're looking for from a sponsorship, but sponsoring with the local football team could deliver you exactly the same benefit, but just on a different level, obviously.
Can I pick up on that? Because your observation about kind of grassroots amateur sport, there may be some people who are listening now who would ask the question: if I want to pitch up to Heineken or Coca-Cola, I've got a small grassroots football project or a sports project. What would you expect these people to be telling you? What do you want to know from them if they're pitching up to you for sponsorship money?
I think you need to, you need to identify an opportunity. For me, and I've seen the question be asked there in the comments. But my experience of sponsorship has always very much been probably more of a strategic position in terms of the brand, or the when I was working at an agency, a brand asking us to do a review, to look at the market, to then identify partners for that brand, as opposed to someone coming in and knocking on the door and suddenly selling something in. Now that does happen now and again, but I would say it's far more strategic the other way around, that you select what you're looking for. So I would say if I was working again at any level of sponsorship, because I think the principles remain the same. If you're going to talk to a brand, it's identifying maybe an opportunity that you've seen with a brand. I think obviously get to know the brand. It sounds ridiculous, but I honestly do still get emails sent to me where it's either the wrong name is on there, as in my name, where they haven't changed it, or it says, "Dear Ben, fantastic to see you still at Panasonic." That really does happen, and the reason I say that is it illustrates that the absolute opposite should be being done. Sometimes you look at something and go, right, I've just seen a brand sign the Premier League. Now, is now a time for me to pitch up with my local League Two club, for example, when that brand has just announced a Premier League sponsorship? Potentially not, because the two don't match up. Actually, I've got an incredible grassroots football program that could really complement this Premier League. We talked about CSR before, but it could really complement the big Premier League deal that's been done. That's what I've identified. That's what they're going to build my pitch and my information and my data around. And that's what I'm going to go and talk to the brand about. The other thing I would say is concentrate on what you know, and what you should know should be your product. Again, I think it's wasted time when you read a pitch document, or if someone wants to come to talk to you and they spend the first 2 or 3 slides telling you about Heineken or telling you about Coca-Cola. I don't need to be told about where I'm working at this present time. So just focus on what makes you different, why you think there's a conversation to be had, and ultimately how you feel that value can be driven. And then, as I mentioned before, how it can be measured, and how are we therefore going to root that conversation in sort of fact.
Mm-hmm.
That would be some of my points.
Okay, so coming across to you, Ricardo, what are you looking for? And again, there the pitch question. What would you advise somebody who's pitching up to a sponsor?
So if the organization has interesting, meaningful content that people care about, it can be a small event or a national event or a global event. We are always interested to learn and to talk to them. I think the mistake that most people do is a lot of people reach out to me, and I think my position, Benjamin's positions are similar in this context. If you have an event that talks to people, in the northeast of Germany, and it's a great event, it's very meaningful, I cannot help you, because I have to. There between me and the person in charge of that decision, there are a couple of other people. So understanding where in the organization is the right place to have the conversation is the first. I think the first step. So if a global organization wants to discuss a global program or a multi-country program, they should come to me. They should come to Benjamin, because our jobs, the nature of our jobs are global. What we do a lot is, we try to help people navigate through the company and find the right people to have the conversation. And a good example is there's a great soccer tournament in Hawaii. They reach out to me. I have to talk to Coca-Cola North America, who has to talk to the West region that manages the state of Hawaii. That has to talk to the bottler that produces our products and make the investments in Hawaii. They have to evaluate, and then it goes back to me to give them feedback. So we are complicated.
Can you send that to me, please, Ricardo? I'm in. We're in Hawaii. No problem.
Yeah, I would love to do it too. So understanding where in the organization you should land is, I think, is a first step. And then what Benjamin said, you have to understand what the company is doing, what they're trying to do to accomplish based on what they're doing in the market, to be reasonable. I think the most common thing today is, we have a lot of people reaching out saying, hey, can we have a call for me to tell you about this? And it's just, impossible to have calls with everyone that has a good idea. So usually the way we handle this is, if you have a good idea, send me something I can read and I can react to. And if it makes sense, we can have a conversation. and either with me or I connect you with the right people in our organization to make a decision. But and then the basics that Benjamin mentioned about just doing your job well, just making sure that you have all your homework done properly, and that says a lot about the quality of the organization. If you cannot put the name of the company or the individual right, how can I trust you with my money to do an event?
At that point, can I just interject again? And for everybody who's sending me, what about the ROI question? What about the return on investment question? Okay, it's coming. Okay, it's a bit like a great soap opera. The really dramatic moment comes later. You draw people in first. So, Ricardo, you've identified the property, you've signed the deal, everything everything on paper looks good. In terms of organization and management, what comes next? And there have been a couple of questions around activation. So in terms of what comes next, organization management, if you could talk a little bit about activation as well.
Sure. Sure. And my answer is very specific to the work that a global organization does. I mean, if you go to a domestic business, a local business, they will certainly act differently. But I'll take the most complicated one to promote, to activate, which is, and when I say activation, I mean the development of campaigns and marketing and promotions and the event itself. So once the contract is signed, we set up teams usually. So in Japan for the upcoming Olympics, we have had a team in place since 2016. We hired people before the Rio Olympics. We brought people from Japan to Brazil to be trained in Olympics. Most of them Japanese. We send them back to Coca-Cola Japan. Over the years, we help them. That's part of our job here. We help them define what the legacies that they want for the project will be, the kind of people they should hire, the kind of structure they should have. And in some specific activities, we have specialists that have done the work in previous events. So the Olympic torch relay is a repeatable project. So we have people that have done 3, 4, 5 torch relays. We send them to Japan to work with Japan on the torch relay. Venue operations, what kind of movements and equipment and staffing that you have to have on site to execute the event, to have specialists, and that's why we send people to Japan to do this kind of work too. And then on the marketing side, for 2-3 years, we develop campaigns. What's the marketing is going to look like? How the advertising is going to look like? The kind of promotions. Because of the nature of the company, we have people in a lot of different countries. Over 200 countries with people on the ground working for the company. We develop things like merchandising catalog. So if you want to do a promotion with your local trade, there is a catalog that has been developed, approved, vetted centrally, that you can just order the premium for your promotions. So all of that is a process that takes 4 to 5 years. So today, a lot of people are asking, so Tokyo was postponed, the Olympics in Tokyo, what the implication for you? There are not that many because the work is done. And today I'm working for Paris in 2024. I'm working for LA 2028, for the FIFA World Cup in Qatar 2026. So my range is much broader than a local company that is doing the event next month. That's why I say I have to qualify the answer to say it's very specific to a global event in a global company. And the answers change a lot if you go to, depending on the scale of the partnership.
Benjamin? There's a question about organization and management and activation.
Yeah, again, I think, again, we'll probably come on to it, but I think obviously at the starting point is the contract that you sign with the person that you're obviously sponsoring or working with. Now that contract may have things that you have to deliver. So you need to, both obviously myself and Ricardo work for very similar businesses at the moment in terms of what we are in terms of a beverage. So there, previously again, when I was at Samsung, there could be physical things that you need to deliver as part of that sponsorship deal, whether it's beer to be poured to fans, or whether it's TV screens to be put up around the stadium to enhance the enjoyment in the stadium. So there's almost a functional element to begin with of what have we signed up to, what do we need to deliver, and how do we work that. Then there's the different rights that you receive around a partnership, and as we mentioned before, and probably we'll come on to talk about, I think again, negotiating the rights, and when we say rights, we mean everything from tickets to the advertising that you get on LED boards. Maybe you get your logo painted on the pitch, maybe you get your logo on the shirt of the players, maybe you get appearances from the manager of a football club, or 4 football players that play for the team, or rugby or cricket. I always go to football, that's my passion, apologies, as an Arsenal fan. But you look at those rights, and again, we may come on to talk about it, but everyone does things differently. But I think in this world, and where sponsorship is such an integral part of marketing, and we'll talk about ROI, but you do get, there is a microscope on what sponsorship is delivering. There's no point in negotiating a sponsorship deal with rights that you could never use or that you can't use. So you need to make sure that you've got that good body of rights, and then you'll look again from a global perspective. How do we allocate those tickets? How do we allocate those appearances? And then you look beyond that from a brand perspective of how are we going to use this association with the event, or with the team, or with the ambassador, to create advertising, to create campaigns, to create CSR initiatives, to move the agenda and to move the needle on why we're doing sponsorship in the first place.
Now, I don't want to ask you this question specifically as someone from Coca-Cola or someone from Heineken. Let's answer it anyway. No, let's answer it. Ask it. Let me ask it much more generally. Is there an industry standard, or is there a kind of going rate for what professionals believe you should spend on activation? Is there a ratio in terms of contract value to activation value, or doesn't it work like that?
Who's first?
Ricardo. Ricardo started laughing first, so he goes first.
This is one of the most debated points in our side of the business, because there is no right answer. I think just for the audience, ideally, you would spend a lot more promoting your products, using the event, and doing your marketing, than paying rights fees for the owners of the rights. So this is the ratio of fees and activation. It's very important. As long as it's above 1, it's acceptable. We have a target. And I say a target because we have over 2,000 sponsorships globally. So there's not a single answer for where the average is. But our goal is that we are going to have over 2 to 1. So every dollar we spend paying someone to acquire rights, we are going to invest double in promoting these rights and creating marketing for our brands. In a lot of sponsorships, we are above 3. There are sponsorships that we are at 4, and there are others that we constantly work to make sure they get above water. So conceptually, 2 to 1 is the answer. There's a broad range of answers depending on where you look.
Thanks, Ricardo. Is that okay for you, Benjamin? You want to add to that?
So we're going to fall out for the first time. No. Do you know what? I have, again, I at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I come back to what I mentioned about objectives, and I have a very different view of this, or a slightly different view. I've heard a number of ratios over the year: 1 to 1, 2 to 1, 10 to 1. Be that at conferences, be that talking to rights holders, be that at businesses I've worked in. How much you spend on activating doesn't necessarily lead to the success of the partnership. So I've worked on partnerships where let's say 0 has been spent on activation, but the partnership is still successful because the objectives were set in the first place. The reason for sponsoring was very, very clear. And without spending any money, there is a return on investment that you're clear about. So I'm a very strong believer that there is no set formula, and that, again, I think, again, we talk on the level of global major partnerships that we're both extremely lucky to work in. And when you're talking about those levels, the activation clearly comes hand in hand, and there is activation put behind those sponsorships that way exceed probably the fee level. But sponsorships, as we mentioned, can reach a huge number of different levels, and I'm a strong believer that certain partnerships done in the right way, you could never spend a penny on again, and they would still deliver value and deliver commercial benefit to you. I use the example of a football team again. You know, if I spend £1 million to sponsor a Premier League team, and as part of those rights, I get a box at the stadium. Now, during the year, if I entertain 200 guests in that box, and entertaining those guests cost me no more money because it's baked into the deal I've done, but that entertaining guarantees me business of £10 million a year, and I haven't spent another single penny on that partnership, then it's an absolute no-brainer, and it pays for itself ultimately. And there's none of this 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1. But as I said, it comes back to why you're doing it in the first place, who the brand is, who the partnership is. And there's a different example for everything. But I am definitely somebody who gets away from this sort of ratio discussion when it comes to sponsorship.
Can I just, something's caught my attention. Other teams in red are available. Okay, I just thought I'd make that clear because I can see there are some different fans of different persuasions whose teams are also, or do also play in red. So that's the first thing to say. Other teams who play in red are available, including mine. But we'll go into that another time. Can I just quickly go over to you, Ricardo? And again, I'm aware that we've got students who may be unfamiliar, I don't know, with this. Quick definition, Ricardo. What is activation? Or a quick illustration. What is activation?
Activation is all the money that you put to promote your partnership. It can be the advertising that you are putting on air. It can be the event that you're being part of. It can be, so think about activation as every investment that the company makes that is visible to the consumers, to the fans. If it's not visible, if it's a production of a TV commercial, if it's rights fees, if it's anything else, then it's not activation. So
cool, thank you, that's good for me. So now we move to the question of the day. So how do you evaluate your deals, and what kind of metrics do you use? Benjamin, I think out of the 49 questions that have been sent, there are probably more like 60 questions. I think 59 of the 60 questions are ask them about activation, ask them about metrics. And one of the questions I got even before we started was, what about social media metrics? So Benjamin, evaluation metrics, how is it done?
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing to say is that the reason it's such a hot topic, the reason so many of you asked the question, is there is no one standard universal way of plugging in what you do with sponsorship and getting a value back out of it, to say that, back to that ratio question maybe, of this is how much we spend on sponsorship and this is how much we get out of it. Any of you who are in education or coming to the end of your education, if you can set up an agency or come up with an idea to centralize that, then I would strongly, firstly, probably invest in you. And secondly, recommend that, because if you can land everybody in measuring sponsorship in a certain way, then you will have done a good job. Again, I make no apologies, but I am sounding like a broken record. I strongly believe that you can only measure off of your objectives. Now, clearly, there's a lot of things. I saw a question come up about, AVE, which is kind of media value. And in a nutshell, that is somebody saying that if you buy LED boards within my sport, when people are watching that sport and they see your branding, the cost of this compared to you buying an advert, let's say in the TV break of a similar program, is X against Y. People still absolutely measure like that. It's still, I think it's a way of measuring your awareness. And we spoke before about the value of broadcast. Now, how much you rely on those figures against what else you do and against your deal is another thing. Someone mentioned social media. There are a number of agencies out there who are trying to formulate a singular way to measure brand value on social media, whether that again be an LED board in the background of a Champions League goal that you watch on Twitter, be that on a ambassador wearing a t-shirt with your brand on whilst doing an interview on Instagram. But again, if you have a more two-way commercial relationship with a rights holder or a team, whereby your product is either used or sold by that team, there's ways of obviously tracking those sales or the impact of that partnership on your sales. I always remember being at an agency 8 or 9 years ago, and Land Rover, who was one of the clients, were literally able to track somebody at Twickenham Rugby Stadium, which in the UK is where the England rugby team play, someone interacting with their activation there, which was the Land Rover, which is a big 4x4 vehicle, sort of messing around and going around with some bits. They could track an interaction there to any of their dealerships throughout the country, where someone then either went in for a test drive or ended up purchasing a Land Rover. So they really could go from initial sport sponsorship interaction all the way through to the purchase of a vehicle. So listen, in a long way, what I'm saying is you can only measure sponsorship based on your objectives, and consistency, I think, is again the key, because if you're measuring different sponsorships using different techniques, you're never going to get a parity of your answer. So, we try to measure our sponsorships all in the same way. So at least within how we do it, and there's no right or wrong answer, we can measure everything equally and on the same metrics.
Ricardo?
So a couple of different things that the audience may find interesting. So the first thing that we try to measure, and we measure a lot, we invest a lot in measurement, in models, in protocols, to allow us to make better decisions in the sponsorship. So that's the only conversation, or the most frequent conversation, that my bosses want to have with me. How is this investment better than buying coolers for putting in bars or restaurants? Why should I put money on this partnership instead of buying trucks or investing in plants or hiring more people? So this is super important. So in a global organization, we have people making decisions on sponsorships everywhere, every day. We have the vast majority of our sponsorships are local. So I have local managers making local decisions with their local money to sponsor things. So the first thing that we do is we define the price of the partnership, not the owner of the rights. So how much can I afford? If that's important for me, if that meets our objectives and the partnership makes sense for us from a conceptual standpoint. No, what I mean by that is people in South Africa are football fans. Should the brand be involved with football? Yes. That's the event. So if you pass all these tests, I'm responsible for defining the price of the partnership. So it doesn't matter how you think you're worth. It matters if I can afford, if the expected growth that I'm going to drive, partner with you, creates the revenues and the profit that allows me to pay the fees. So if you're telling me that being part of this event, if I know that being part of this event based on my models will allow me to grow 2% faster, and that 2% means $1 million, I cannot pay you more than $1 million. I have to pay you less than $1 million. So the first thing that we tell our countries is, you have to do this, run these models to understand how much you can invest. And then you have a lot of historical data, a lot of different benchmarks to do it. Once you contract with the partnership, and then you develop your work, you invest, of course you're tracking your investment, you're tracking the performance of the business. Then we have a couple of different models that they look at the development of the business in a certain country. So let's say, and we can do this because we have a very large sample of sponsorships and a large sample of countries. So when you are investing, when country X was investing in that sponsorship, was the country, the business in the country, able to accelerate the growth of the business? If the business was going down, have we been able to reduce the speed of the decline? And we have very well-tested, well-working models that show us the impact of that. So today, I know that when a country promotes the FIFA World Cup or the partnerships that we have, they are able to grow 1, 2, 3x% faster than if they don't. And based on that incremental growth, I can predict, or I can measure later how that translates into extra bottles, cans of product, how much that translates into incremental revenue and incremental profit. So with a decent degree of granularity, I can tell that when a country does X, this is what is going to happen with that country in terms of the business. And that gives a lot of confidence for management to say, I'm going to spend money here because that's a better option than all these other options that I have in my portfolio in other areas of the business. So that doesn't come for free. Over the last few years, we spent a lot of money to develop the models, to build intelligence, to be able to have these conversations with management and with the partners. Because when a club, when a league comes to us and they say, if you want to partner with us, that will cost you 10, I can tell them, you're great, but for us, you are as great as 2, not 10. And that is a very informed and disciplined approach and conversation that we have with our partners that leads to better deals, or to say no to deals that on the surface may seem interesting.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Benjamin. At this point, I want to just draw this section to a close because I'm aware that we've all been sat for nearly 1 hour. We've probably got about another 30 minutes left, and I do want to change direction a little bit with the questions. Can I just say that, and I mean this genuinely, the standard of the questions coming through is just phenomenal. I've been involved in about 700 webinars since last week. Not literally, but it feels like it. And there's a lot of idle chit chat, but genuinely the quality of the questions coming through from people is amazing. And I'm really struggling to decide which questions are the right ones to answer. And so for those of you who sat there and listening at the same time, please do look at the chat bar and look at the questions that are being asked as well. If you want to start your own conversation, please by all means do so. There's the hashtag #SportAssist. If we get a little time towards the end, I may come back to some of the questions that have been asked, but just to say thanks, just phenomenal, really phenomenal. I feel blown away by many of the questions that have been asked. The reason I wanted to change tack here a little bit is because it's not very often that most of us get 2 leading professionals in the same place at the same time who are doing what many of the people who are here today aspire to do. There are many students among us. There are many recent graduates among us. There are people who are working in other industrial sectors who are perhaps looking at a job switch or a career switch. And so what I wanted to do is to warm down today's session, talking less about sponsorship as such, but talking more about Ricardo and Benjamin and getting them to tell us a little bit more about who they are and why they're here. And I guess, Benjamin, first, I just wanted to ask you, how did you get into sponsorship? Where did this all come from?
I'm sure people probably would rather talk sponsorship and the questions than hear about us. But for me, I think we started off this conversation talking about the way in which sport can inspire, and it's something that drives people's passion. And growing up, I was a sports fan first and foremost. I went to school, went to university. Not really clear on what I wanted to do other than work in sport. I came out of university and obviously grew up in London in the UK, and just really had no idea, to be quite frank. I didn't know anybody in the sponsorship industry. I had no family that had gone through that had gone into the industry. I had no pointers, so I really was a blank piece of paper in terms of trying to learn the industry, learn the players, learn the agencies, learn the recruitment companies. Learn which were the big graduate schemes to get on. And quite frankly, I worked in a bar for 12 months whilst applying for every single job that I could find. Social media wasn't as prevalent back then, and neither, quite frankly, was the internet. It was the beginning of really the dot-com bubble. So that, again, it wasn't like a lot of information or opportunities like today were at your fingertips, where you could go onto YouTube and type how to get into the sponsorship industry or Google, and something would come up. So I just started, writing letters to as many people as I possibly could. Long story short, about a year later, I got an interview at the PGA European Tour, who were based just outside of London. I went for a job there. It was a coordinator entry-level job. I didn't get the role. 2 or 3 weeks later, though, I did get a call to say that another similar role had opened up, and would I like the role? So of course I jumped at that, and I went from there. Really, one thing I would say is it was a very much an event-based role. It was a starting role. It wasn't like I was on a graduate program with a very clear view of where I was going to climb up through a particular sector of the industry. And it probably took me 7 or 8 years across. I went from the European Tour, was lucky enough to go to the English Football Association, and then to an agency called Fast Track, who at the time who are now called CSM. And it probably took me 7 or 8 years to really get into the sponsorship side of sport, which once I got into sport and started understanding all the different opportunities into it, I knew sponsorship and kind of the more commercial side of sport was where I wanted to be. But it took me 7 or 8 years to get into that space, and then I've touch wood, been very lucky to have some incredible opportunities come my way since.
What was your degree, Benjamin?
My degree was actually sports science and business. I went to Kingston University in London for a year, and the only reason I went there was because they had a 3-month exchange scheme to a university called Grand Valley State on the Great Lakes in Michigan, outside a place called Grand Rapids. And so I went there for a year, went on this 3-month exchange, absolutely loved it, and basically did everything I possibly could to stay, and ended up staying in university in America for a further 3 years, and then came back, and as I mentioned, went to work in a bar. Long story short, I actually ended up working as a runner in the film industry, and actually worked on the Harry Potter films for a year. And it was then that I got my break into sport, and been very, very, very lucky to work in my passion ever since.
Do you need a particular type of degree to work in the industry, or does anything go?
I don't think so. I can only talk from my own personal experience. I think there are clearly certain skill sets, knowledge that you build up through certain degrees that will help you in certain aspects. But I think what I've learned is that nobody has the same journey. It might be that your degree just purely gets you the interview, and from that point on, you never rely on it again. But you're off. You're doing it. You do a degree in a more business or economic related place, and end up in a creative part of the industry. I'm sure there's many people who maybe more specifically in law or sports law who very much get that role and then progress through sports lawyers, agents, working on contracts more from the legal side. Again, I think I've just found that everyone I deal with yes, your degree, yes, your history, it makes us all where we are. But I think going back to COVID-19, what this has brought about is the power of relationships and the power of people, and the power of being nice to each other. And I think that once you get your break, once you get into the industry, creating your network, being interested, making connections, that's the important part. And that's what's gonna progress you through. And as I said, everybody has their own journey. There is no back to the whole question on how do you measurement. There's no one way of doing it. Everybody has their absolute own journey. There's no right and wrong. My only view would be, I think what I did always try to have a plan. As I said, even though I went into a job that I didn't particularly, it wasn't my dream job, but it was getting into the sports industry. But I knew where I wanted to be. So I knew in the organisation I was in who to talk to, who to go and learn off, who's going to have a coffee with. I remember saying to my old boss at my agency, saying, I was working in the events team. I wanted to be in the commercial sponsorship team. And I went and sat with one of these guys, and he said, well, what's your ambition? And I said, well, it's to sit outside your office. It's to move down the hallway. It's to be there. I've always been clear about where I've wanted to go. And I think that's all you can really manage yourself.
Okay. Ricardo, what's your story?
Luck? No. It's a series of not necessarily well-planned accidents that led to another thing that's led to another thing. So I'm a civil engineer. I graduated in Brazil, grew up in Brazil. You can see the Brazilian shirt here somewhere. Yes. I'm a marketer by heart. I worked for a couple of consumer goods companies before joining Coca-Cola. I worked for Unilever. I worked for Kellogg. And as a traditional marketer, I joined Coca-Cola as a marketer, which is the core of my profession. I have been a general marketer for most of my career. And because of my work with Coca-Cola and growing responsibilities in the marketing function, I ended up involved with global entertainment here in Atlanta back in 2002. Because I'm Brazilian, they thought that I knew about football. So they moved me to sports, and I worked for managing global football for 3 years, leading to the 2006 World Cup in Germany. After that, I took a couple of different jobs outside sports. I thought that sports was not a career that would provide me with a lot of opportunities. Moved back to general marketing, went back to Brazil for a couple of years, 3 years. Then I managed the Coca-Cola marketing function in India and 7 other countries around India for a couple of years. And sponsorships was one of the functions that I was responsible for. At some point, I decided to leave Coke. I left the company, worked for Danone in France as a global marketing director. And I really missed, in all these years since I left sports, I really missed this kind of work. I loved doing this. And at some point I thought, if that's not a career that's going to take me much further, at least it's going to be a fun career to be in. And then I accepted an offer to work for Visa in San Francisco. And I managed the global sponsorships for Visa in the lead up to the FIFA Confederations Cup in Brazil, the World Cup in Brazil, and then the Olympic Games in Brazil, which for me was a treat to be able to do what I love to do in my country. So it was a really special thing to be part of. At some point, Coke called me to come back, and I returned to Coca-Cola in 2016 to manage the global sponsorship for Coca-Cola. So it's if there's one thing that I learned with all these changes and moving countries and moving companies, is when you find something that you really enjoy doing, and I really enjoy the sports marketing work, just go for it. And if the career will figure it out as you grow, as you move, as long as you're doing something that you really enjoy. The understanding the business is more important to a company today than understanding sports. And and there's a lot of people that are sports fans that they think, oh, I want to work in sports because I grew up playing whatever, ice hockey. I mean, I play football like everybody else in Brazil, but I like the business of sport a lot more than the sport itself. And so it's really disturbing when you're watching sports on TV, when you're watching sport, and the action is going. You can never pay attention to the action. You're thinking everything around the event, and so but it's a fun environment to work with, and I'm very fortunate that all this coincidence and sometimes accidents and sometimes bad decisions led to where I am today.
You know what, guys? They were just such brilliant answers, because I think a lot of students tend to think that people who hold such positions, you've got a control room, and when you were 21, you sat in your control room and you think, right, this is the plan, this is where we're going, this is the trajectory. And then kind of 10 years later, you say, here I am now, it worked perfectly. But, being unemployed or working in a bar or just kind of stumbling across something, if I was to talk about my career history, how did this happen? It's just sheer luck and fluke and passion and desire and commitment and all of these other things. So thanks, they're really great answers. Just drawing out of that a little bit, and I'm aware that we've probably got just over 10 minutes, is I guess, Benjamin, just 2 or 3 things, and then I'll flip over to Ricardo. 2 or 3 things. What do you need to make it in the industry, in the sponsorship industry?
I think, I would say probably anything that you would need to work in any industry, if that makes sense. I think Ricardo talked about passion. I think really caring and having an interest in what you do. It's not just enough to be a sports fan. You've really got to want to work in this industry, to go the extra mile. I think, be curious. I always say to where I work now at the moment, just because maybe a meeting doesn't necessarily, you don't feel there's necessarily an action for your reason to be there, go to that meeting, because it might open up your mind to something else. So when I say about getting into the industry, dial into as many webinars, conferences, read as much information as you possibly can, because not only will that drive your interest, but you'll be learning. What you don't realize is you'll be learning about the industry, and you'll be learning the terminology, and you'll be learning who the players are, and you'll be learning about different deals that have happened. And so try and build that knowledge base as quickly as possible, really, because again, that if you're really passionate about something, you're going to know about something. And I think, and probably the third thing, again, we have a really great eclectic team, and again, where I've worked previously, graduates and people who are lucky to get involved, and what sets those people apart are just the people that when I say go that extra mile. It's not about sitting at your desk until 10 o'clock at night, but if you get that opportunity, really grasp it. Don't turn up at 9:01 and leave at 4:59. Really get involved, really ask questions, really go the extra mile, because it shocked me, if I'm honest, the amount some people that I've come across or have helped get an opportunity in the industry that have then absolutely flown, and some people who have an opportunity that I would have loved to have had at that age, and they just don't see it through. So if you really want to do it, really go for it. That would be my 3 things.
Ricardo?
Trying to complement what Benjamin said, and it's have a plan, but don't be attached to your plan. I think have a very loose plan, and invest and do your homework. I think that everybody that is connected here today is doing this. I mean, you care about your education, you care about connecting with the industry, you care about you're spending your time listening to us talking here. That means that you are ahead of everybody else that isn't. Not because of Benjamin and I or Simon, with all respect, but because you care about yourself and you're spending time doing this. So do your homework, read about what's going on, try to understand what's going on. And information is available for for you and me the same way today. So just make sure that you have as much baggage and knowledge that you can possibly have, formal, going through school and spending time with people capable like Professor Simon, or going to events, and just because that gives you reference, and having reference in what's good and what's not so good is what makes a difference between a good professional and a not so good professional. I think Benjamin and I have the privilege of seeing a lot of stuff, so that helps us. So our jobs is, I think I speak for myself, my job is very easy compared to someone who's starting in the industry now, because I have visibility of a lot of things, so you may not. But do your homework, be prepared, invest time in preparing yourself, and just and the other thing is, I think what the biggest reasons for a sports marketer to fail is being a groupie, being in the sports because you really want to take that photo with that player. Don't be this person. Remember, you're representing somebody else's business, that you are there to make that business grow. You are there to develop a business that uses a sport. The sport is not your end goal. So be aware of that. Remember why you play the role that you play. And then I think finally is just the other thing is, it's maybe obvious, but just be nice to people. We know who the good people and the bad people in the industry are. And I am a big fan of Heineken because of the work that they do. But people like Benjamin at Heineken, they're not there by accident. We know who the good people in the industry are. So good work comes from good companies, and they hire good people, and we know who all of them are. So there are 5 people in the industry that I would never hire to do anything, but just 5. Everybody else is usually nice. So just be one of them. It's a best way to have the doors open for you to be in positions to be offered jobs and to be part of projects and everything else. So that's my advice.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question, because I think the job seekers in the room would berate me if I don't ask this question. Benjamin, and if you don't know, say I don't know. That's fine. How do you find a job, particularly at this point in time?
Yeah, again, interesting times, but again, I go back to what we said right at the beginning. Next year could be the greatest year in sport ever. And sport is going to have an incredible role to play in us recovering, essentially, from what are these really dark times that many of us are in different stages of it and not out of yet. It's going to be really interesting to see how businesses react and how ways of working change. Might there be more flexible roles? Might there be more fixed roles? So I certainly wouldn't get disheartened that this is a bad time. I think there's very much a view to be said that this is a great time to come out and start looking for a role in maybe in 2, 3, 4 months onwards. And I think, just to echo what we said before, I think there are industry papers, there are things that you should read, there are things that you should get involved in. Try and contact people through, build your network on LinkedIn. Again, this is sometimes something where I think maybe people overlook is we live in a day and age again where everyone has access to everything. So look at your social media accounts and make sure they're a representation of what you want to be seen as. Maybe make some of your social media accounts private compared to some of your maybe more business focused ones. Get your CV polished up. Look at your CV. It took me years and meeting different people and asking them to send me their CV. Being really honest. Would you send me a CV? Maybe take some of the sensitive information out of it, so I can copy it, so I can look at how a real business CV looks like. You still receive CVs where you judge someone instantly, unfortunately, because the spelling is bad or the setup is bad, and you think, well, if someone's not investing in themselves in that way, are they going to invest in what we're doing? And are they the right person? So I think all of that, there's a lot of information out there, like Ricardo said. We all have access to it. soak up as much as you possibly can. You know, if I take something like Euro 2020, which will now happen in Euro 2021, look at all the cities it's going on in. Look at UEFA. Look at who UEFA work with. Look at who the people UEFA work with. Look at the brands involved, and start mapping out how you can contact all these people. Because I suppose what I would say is it's probably unlikely that the job is going to come to you and land in your lap. It's probably going to be that you need to go out there, be proactive, and find that opportunity for yourself. So I think a mix of those things, but I think it's a positive. It could be a positive time. So, but don't be disheartened.
Thank you, Benjamin. Ricardo, finally.
Yeah. So yeah, the economy is in trouble, and we all know this. But you should look at this time as those few minutes when the coach tells the players to warm up before entering the field. Get ready for the opportunities, because they will come. It may take a couple of months, but the industry is very strong and will come back faster than most. So whenever the jobs are back, if the jobs are not happening today, you should be ready for it. So like Benjamin said, do your homework, research who you want to work for and where you want to work for. I always think that if you are in the beginning of your career, working at an agency is better than working for a company, just because it gives you a range. It gives you the opportunity to see a lot of things and build this inventory of experiences working with different companies and different segments, and that helps a lot. And most companies, a lot of companies, they look at their agencies to hire people for their teams. So it's very normal that if you're doing a good job for Coke or for other companies, we will prioritize you over someone that I have never seen. So it's always a great way, and there are a variety of agents that you can join. So I think that's a good starting point to develop this, all your experiences. And luckily next year there's a concentration of events, so there's a lot of things going on in many parts of the world. So it is a good year to join the market in our profession.
And on that note, can I just bring proceedings to a conclusion? When I was envisioning what this would be like, this is how it was. So we've got 284 people, 283 people still online, which I think after 90 minutes of talking about sponsorship, that's an incredible thing. Certainly in my lectures, I'm lucky to keep 10 in the room after an hour. So this is testament to the depth and the quality of the answers. So Benjamin, Ricardo, just many thanks. I really appreciate it. I'm sure on behalf of all the participants, they really appreciate it as well. I know you've given up your time freely. You were just completely open about this and said, hey, we want to try and help the community as much as we can. We are all part of this community. The attendees have been here today are part of the community. So everybody who's been here, even those who've gone, don't go, stay. Thank you for being here. I think it was brilliant. Thank you very much to everybody.